Hey everyone, aside from the textbook mix-up, I think that we are off to a great start. I've enjoyed getting to know each of you a little bit through our conversations on the discussion board and through your work on Twitter. I think we had some interesting discussions and ideas about the concept of civilization itself. And I wanted to throw that out there because, given a course like this one, we're going to be able to discuss a lot of big ideas. Like what it means when we decide that certain societies are civilized, others are not, for example. Because we're going to try to cover a lot of ground in terms of history over a very short period of time this semester. And so we'll have to operate at the kind of view from 30,000 feet, as it were, and think about how big themes help us to understand the history of the world that we live in. I also enjoyed reading about history and historical study. I think we had some good conversations about why critical thinking is so important as we study the past. Of course, historical evidence, primary sources, are those that were created at the time of the event. Secondary sources are those like our textbook or like historical monographs, books written by scholars on a particular topic. Those are secondary. They're based on research in primary sources, and they're based on looking at other secondary sources and thinking about what questions still remain to help build our historical knowledge and to complete our picture, at least to the fullest extent that we possibly can, of the past. So going back to primary sources, there were a few comments, and I often hear this in history classes as we start the semester, that primary sources are somehow correct and somehow factual, that they are going to the source. All of that is true, or I should say the fact that we're going to the source, we're looking at the time period that we're studying, that's true. Primary sources aren't necessarily more factual than secondary sources, though. In fact, the opposite is often true. Because historical evidence is created by human beings, so there are people, even in the ancient world, people at the time of the event recording their perspectives on what was going on, or leaving behind certain artifacts about what was going on at the time. They present us with just a certain perspective or one sliver of the story. Many of us mentioned there are multiple sides to every story. Not even just two sides, multiple sides to every story. And so primary sources, people write things for a reason. They write things or they record things or they create things with a certain purpose in mind, and sometimes that purpose might be to say, my way of looking at this situation is the right one. And they're trying to shout down other perspectives or discount other perspectives. And so as we read about the past, we have to take all of that into consideration. We have to think about what that means if our goal is to present as many perspectives as possible and to try to put together the puzzle of what happened in the past. We need to recognize then primary sources might be kind of faulty. The author might be lying to us for a certain reason. That's why if a secondary source is done well, and if the author is critical, appropriately critical of the primary sources, secondary sources might be a better survey for helping us to see the big picture. That's not to say we shouldn't consult the primary sources ourselves. We absolutely should. We should understand how that narrative was built and what kinds of evidence was used to get us there. But again, just trying to get us to think about how we should consider secondary sources like our textbook and primary sources like the ones that we'll be looking for to complete the primary source assignments. You probably want to approach them a little differently. All of them should be approached with questions in mind, trying to think about overall significance and how we can get the fullest picture that we possibly can of the past. So I'm going to stop there because I might start rambling. I think maybe I already have. But hopefully I've underscored that difference between primary and secondary sources If you still have questions about what that difference is, don't hesitate to add them in the comments below this video announcement. Also, as we look toward the next module, and we're starting with Module 2, we're going to begin our pattern of asking discussion questions based on the assigned readings in the textbook. Please keep in mind that those discussion questions need to be open-ended. They should be asking for critical evaluation of the historical events that we're reading about. If you have any questions about what it means to ask an open-ended question, don't hesitate to ask. I'll be happy to help out with that. Essentially, though, you're asking for a response that's not just a little detail. It's not a yes or no, but it's a bigger response in terms of we have to think about, or someone responding to your question would have to think about why is this important? They would have to draw on evidence and ideas from across the readings and so on. So you don't want to ask, what year was the city of, or the civilization of Cahokia founded, for example. But instead you might ask, what type of society developed at Cahokia, and what does that help us to understand about early societies in the ancient Americas? Again, that's just an example I pulled off the top of my head, but that's kind of getting at what the difference is between just asking a pointed question, a closed question, versus an open-ended one. All right, I look forward to continuing our work on world civilizations, and again, as always, let me know if you have questions or need help.